Hello and welcome to Corvus Painting. Today we are painting a Dark Angel Space Marine Intercessor in a Grimdark style. We'll be using the following equipment within this video, however if you don't have the same stuff, feel free to make substitutions with similar paints or brands. The primer we have used today is Matte Black by the Colourforge. To begin the process we're going to start with Doombull Brown. For this step we'll be putting our paint onto our wet palette and adding a small amount of water to the paint. We will then be dampening our makeup sponge and rinsing it out so it doesn't retain too much water. We then apply a small amount of paint to the sponge, working the paint into the sponge and testing it on the palette and our hand so that we don't overload the model. We then liberally apply the paint to the model, covering the majority of it. Don't worry about covering the guns or details such as that, we can fix that later. Ideally, we'll cover all of the model except those hard to reach recesses. We then add Caliban Green to our palette, mixing it in with the brown that's already on the palette until we have a very dark green mix. Then with this mix we will apply it all over the model again, however this time don't push in as far as we did before. However you still need to cover as much of the armour as we can reach. Then we're going to add more Caliban Green to our mix and repeat the process. However, as we get lighter with the green, we want to start aiming at the flat panels and parts of the model where the light would hit. Then going with Caliban Green, remember to add a small amount of water and to remove the first few dabs of paint onto something such as your palette or your hand before applying it to the model. We don't want to overload the model. As we lighten our green, start to focus on the top of the model. This method is a great substitute for an airbrush and can also be a great method for batch painting. We will then add Warpstone Glow into our green mix and blend it until it looks something like this. Again, as we get lighter we want to apply less to the model. I think this is the part where the green really starts to shine. One final mix of Warpstone Green, and to get a nice top highlight we want to aim for the top of the model and large panels, such as the legs. Once we have completed our makeup sponge section, we want to come in and give the model a very light dry brush of Warpstone Green. For this I'm using a wooden dry brush palette. I find less is more when it comes to dry brushing, but if you do go a little bit too heavy, don't worry, after using the streaking grime it'll be less noticeable. I personally prefer circular dry brushes rather than flat ones. You can always use makeup brushes such as this one, as they are a cheaper alternative to hobby ones and work just as well in my experience. We will then come in with Abaddon Black and black out any black details such as the belt, tubes, undersuit and details such as that, as well as any details that we want to be silver in the future. We will then use Khorne Red for details such as the gun and eyes. This may take 2 thin coats. When doing the eyes, practice makes perfect, and I find it easier to move the model closer rather than moving the brush too much. Then we will highlight the red details with Mephiston Red, aiming for the top of the gun as well as the front of the lenses. This red gives a nice contrast to the green and black. Then we're going to use Zandri Dust to paint one of the leg panels and the chest aquila, as well as any purity seals your model may have. For the leg, I find painting a rough cross outline and then filling it in is the best way to do it. It'll look a little bit rough, but don't worry. As for the chest aquila, only paint the parts that you can see. Don't worry about painting the whole thing, just be careful during this phase and don't overload your brush. We will then go back in with Abaddon Black to finish the leg pattern. I find slowly adding a right angle at the top and bottom works well, slowly increasing the size until the two right angles hit each other. Take your time with this, details like this help elevate a paint job from a good battle ready to looking awesome. Then with Leadbelcher we're going to fill in the areas which we want to be silver. Those are mostly on the gun. I do find having a black base coat helps with this because any missed spots look like a shadow. Now we're on to the transfers. I'll use Microset and Microsol as they haven't let me down before. The best method is starting with Microset and applying it onto the areas where we want to have the transfers, so in this case it will be the shoulders and right knee pad. After cutting the transfers off, we then dampen the transfers we're using with Microset on some kitchen roll. Give it 30 seconds to a minute and the transfers should come right off the paper. Then work the transfer into position using Microset. Make sure it's flat and then apply some Microsol on top of the transfer to help flatten it out. It also binds it to the model. If you've applied too much, just use some kitchen roll to lightly dab at any excess. After you've let the transfer dry for an hour or more, we then apply another transfer on top of one of the previous ones. This being a squad number on top of the squad marking. Again, details such as this really help elevate a model. After we've let the transfers dry, preferably overnight or something like that, we will then varnish the model. This step isn't needed however, but it does protect the model from chipping when we use white spirits later. It also secures the model for gaming. After letting the varnish dry overnight, we will then use the streaking grime. As this is an enamel based paint, be careful, make sure you've got good ventilation, and if you're a youngster or uncomfortable with enamels, stick to washes and skip this phase. I like to use two plastic cups, one for the streaking grime and one for the white spirits, and use an old brush to apply the grime. Using that old brush, liberally apply all the grime over the model. This step may seem a bit scary, however, trust the process. We then use two foam eyeshadow applicators. Dip one end in the white spirits and start removing the grime in a downwards motion. The main focus is to keep the grime in the recesses and to remove it from all the details and upper sections of the model. When using streaking grime, it's all up to personal taste, so remove as much as you want or as little as you want. I then come in with an eyeshadow applicator which hasn't been put in white spirits and just remove some of the excess. This helps soak the white spirits up as well as removing some of the extra grime. Give it a few hours to dry and we're almost there. We will then give the model a very light dry brush with Warpstone Glow, just to add some highlights back, focusing on not hitting any previous details. Then we'll be using some torn up sponge to start adding chips and battle damage. Using some tweezers, tear a small bit of sponge up. Starting with Warpstone Glow, we're going to be adding small chips to the corners of the armour. It is important to only have a small amount of paint on the sponge when doing this step, so be sure to test it on something before using it on the model. Less is more during this phase. Try focusing the chips on areas which would likely get damaged over time, such as corners and large areas like the shoulder pads and legs. Then we'll repeat this process with Abaddon Black, going over the same areas we already have done, but this time we'll be using less paint. This creates a 3D effect where it looks like the armour has been ripped off over time. We'll then come in with some Leadbelcher and a small brush to highlight the silver. We'll be focusing on the raised areas of the gun during this phase. We'll also add a light highlight to the black chips we already added previously. This will complete that 3D effect and make those chips really stand out. Use the side of your brush when doing this step and just catch to the corners. Then it's on to the basing. For this I like to start with painting the base and the rim with 2 coats of Abaddon Black. I'm using Geek Gaming basing glue and an old brush, however PVA would work just fine. And painting all over the base with this glue. And then using Geek Gaming's Grimdark City Rubble, I drop the model in and give it a shake and a tap. We then use one final coat of Abaddon Black to finish the base's rim, and after that the model is complete. I hope you've enjoyed this tutorial and have found it useful. If you have, please like and subscribe and give me any suggestions of what you might like to see next. Until next time, thank you.